Today, I'll be working on this heavily modified Tyco C630 once again. Before that though, let me give you a recap about what we've already done to this unit. For a little bit of background, this thing is a dual motor Tyco C630. You can see we've got gears on both ends here, which is out of the ordinary. Recently, I went through and cleaned up everything in here and got this model to run once again, but when we got to the rear power truck here, we came across a few issues. There were some issues with the springs, the brush plate, a whole bunch of little things and whatnot. But the biggest issue is that one of the pivots was actually broken. So what I did is I went in and I used a 256 screw, tapped it into place, and thought that would work. However, when I went to test this thing out, it made quite a racket. I'll show you how this unit runs in just a few moments. First though, I'll show you where the source of that noise is. If I flip the model over, here's the screw, and right here is the frame. When the truck moves around, the screw is actually able to touch the frame of the locomotive, and it makes that pretty awful noise that I was hearing. It may not be as bad as I'm describing it, but it's still bugging me quite a bit. I don't think it'll damage the shell, but this shell's actually in really nice condition. I think it looks really cool, and I don't want to risk it. And the only reason I couldn't fix this is because I didn't have another power torque drive laying around, and we'll get to that in a few seconds as well. I've got the C630 set up on the track and my microphone has been disconnected just so you can hear everything this model is doing. Another thing worth noting is the traction tires I installed on the rear drive are not the smoothest and they cause the engine to wobble a little bit. So while we're working on that rear truck, that's something else I can address. But I'll give this thing some power and hopefully it makes the racket it was making earlier. It's still not great. I think it only did it 2 times on that lap, but we'll flip it in reverse and see if it's any worse that way. Clearly, it's not as bad as I remember the issue being when I worked on this unit a couple of weeks ago, but it's definitely still something I want to address. I've known about that issue since I first fixed this engine a couple of weeks ago, but I haven't been able to fix it because I did not have a spare power torque drive. Although that changed just a few weeks ago when I got a huge lot of HO scale junk models for free, and included in that lot was this Tyco GP20 with a power torque drive, which I needed to finish this project. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to part out this unit. I'm going to use the motor truck and just kind of stick it back here once we get it all cleaned up and all that, because I don't think I'll be able to use the rear truck here, but I'll take a quick little break, take a look at both of these models, and see exactly what I want to do. I've taken a pretty good look at all of the parts on both of these units, and I think I have a good plan to get both of these things running again, and that all relies on one little tiny thing I noticed. These Tyco units, as many of you know, were only designed to have one drive truck at the front of the unit, not in the rear. So the tolerances up front for a drive truck and all of its components are much greater than at the rear of the unit. So if I go in here, this one little screw sticks out just enough to contact the frame, but there really isn't much room for the truck to pivot side to side, and it just doesn't seem like it's the greatest design overall, but for a basic stock truck that wasn't modified with a screw like this, I think it'll work. Going up to the front of the unit, there's a ton of room in here. If I flip it over to the side where all the gears are on, there's plenty of room, so if I had that one large gear with a screw, it would not under any circumstances contact the shell of the locomotive. And it's the exact same case right here on the GP20. It's kind of harder to see, but there's for sure plenty of room. So I think what's going to happen is I'm going to take out this rear truck, take out some of the components and things, and we're going to kind of do a truck swap in a convoluted manner. On the C630, I'm going to leave the original brush plate because it has some custom wiring that is pretty important to keeping this unit running. We're going to leave the brush plate on this unit for the exact same reason. I don't want to have to screw with any wiring or anything, and it just kind of makes sense. And on here, I'm going to be using the gears, the block, the motor, the springs, and the brushes, and putting them in here. But we're not going to be using the wheel sets since they're different on a C630 and the GP20. So I'm going to take these wheels and put them in this truck, and we're going to take these wheels and kind of put them in this truck. The other thing I want to do is I want to see if we can get these side frames put on these trucks here, and ideally if we can make one of these fit on this older Mantua style truck. That'll be more work and it'll require a lot of trial and error, but I think it's possible, and at the end of the day, I think we can get both of these units functional once more. And just for fun, let's test the GP20 before we get started. I'm pretty sure this thing doesn't run, but let's just give it power and see what happens. I've got full power in the track now. We'll wiggle this thing just a little bit. I am hearing a little bit of something from the motor, and we're getting a light flickering. So I'm assuming there's probably not anything dramatically wrong with this unit. It probably just needs a good cleaning, and I think that is a very good sign for this entire project. Now, let's dive in. I've already popped out both of the motor trucks we're going to be working on just to save a little bit of time, but we'll start by tearing the pieces we need out of the Santa Fe unit, and then we'll go into tearing down this unit. Very clearly, everything has been torn apart. I'm not really going to worry about the truck that just came out of this unit that we're going to be using in the GP20, since I just cleaned it up, gave it fresh oil, and did all that. It should be good to go. But what we do need to focus on is the truck that is going to be going back into the C630. This one right here. It really doesn't look all that bad. The commutator for sure needs a decent cleaning. There's quite a bit of grease and whatnot in here that needs to get cleaned up, but it's really not the worst I've ever seen. So theoretically, this should be really simple to fix up. The springs and brushes also appear to be in very, very good condition. The springs don't look compressed, and the brushes actually look really clean. Usually I'd clean these things up, but these ones look like they have very, very little wear on them. I did also take a look just to see if it would be possible to swap these truck covers and the side frames around, and it doesn't look like it. Both of them seem to be pretty securely attached to each other, so short of breaking anything, I don't think I'm going to be able to make the change, which is fine. I'll figure out putting couplers on the C630 at some point in the future. And again, when we're tearing into this drive unit here, we really don't need to worry about the wheels in this case because these are the same ones that just came out of that C630 truck. But when we're working on the GP20, I'm going to need to give these wheels that came out of that unit some attention because they look to be in pretty bad condition. They need a good cleaning, some new traction tires, all that fun stuff. So we'll worry about that later, but for now we'll clean up this truck, and ideally we can get the C630 put back together first. Before we clean the block and all of its components, I'm going to be using this fiberglass pencil to clean off the commutator. I'm going to use some rubbing alcohol and some Q-tips to clean up everything else. And then when we go to put it all back together, I'm going to use some Labelle 107 for all the bearings and gears. Now that all of our components have been very thoroughly cleaned, it is time to give this drive a little bit of fresh oil before we put the plate back over the commutator. I'm going to give this little pivot gear here a little bit of oil, both on the bearing and on the gear itself. We're also going to give these three bearings a little bit of fresh oil, and we'll give the gears a bit of fresh oil. Now it's time for the tricky part of this, getting the springs and brushes into this plate and lining this up on top of all of it. And that's why I have this little tool right here, and I'm going to be trying something new with it. This is just a cutout that typically I hold in place like so when we're putting brushes and whatnot in. But today I'm going to try holding it in with just a little bit of masking tape just to see if that makes any sort of difference or makes it any easier. I don't exactly know how it'll turn out, but I'm just going to see what happens, and if it works, I might continue doing this. Everything should now be properly reassembled. I'm just going to give this little bearing right here a tiny, tiny bit of fresh oil. And before we go putting everything fully back together, I want to test this thing out. I've got some power in my controller and some leads set up, so let's see if this thing will start. And it seems to be running pretty strong. The reason this backlight isn't on anymore is because I've just taken the light out of the housing to make everything a little bit easier, but it should all be good to go. So now we can put that clip back in place, then we can put the wheels in, and we should be able to test this thing out. Now it's time to test out the C630. Hopefully that repair made some difference, but it's time to give it some power and see what happens. That seems much better. Let's go in reverse and see if it's still better in reverse. And indeed it is. The unit is still wobbling, so I might need to mess with the traction tires, maybe the springs in the trucks, something like that. Not the brush springs, but the springs that sit up here. So it obviously needs a little bit more adjusting, but I think for now this unit is good enough, and that's just little fiddly stuff I can do in my own time. The C630 is done, but now we still have to finish up this GP20. And I think first we just get to put the brush plate back onto the commutator. We don't have to do anything to this motor block. The only thing we have to clean up are these wheels, and we can do that once all this is back in place. Now we've got all this put together, and I put a little bit of fresh oil on that bearing, just like the other unit. I had to actually completely redo the assembly I just showed you because I forgot about this piece right here. So I just did that once again, and I didn't feel like filming it because I didn't think you needed to see it twice. Now let me give this thing some power, and let's see if it starts. And indeed it does, so clearly I've done everything right when getting that back together. I've set the GP20 aside for right now, and we're going to clean up these wheels. I'll start with these two right here. On the brass, I'm going to use a fiberglass pencil, and then for everything else on these wheels, I'm going to be using some rubbing alcohol. And while we're in here, I want to break off these old traction tires, and once we're done, I'll install some fresh ones off camera. The new traction tires have been installed on these two sets of wheels. I just used dental bands like I typically use on these Tyco units, and now we only have a couple of things left to do. We need to bring the GP20 over here, give all three of these a little bit of fresh oil, put them in the front truck, close up the front truck, and then we can move on to just doing some basic maintenance on the rear truck. Now onto the final step, I'm just going to open up the rear truck and give everything in here a good quick cleanup. Now the GP20 is complete and it's all set up. Let me apply some power and let's see what this thing does. It seems to do pretty well in reverse. Let's flip the direction and see how it goes forwards. And it seems to be even stronger going forward. So I think I have to call both the C630 and this GP20 a pretty big success. I was fully expecting to part out this GP20, and I'm glad that I figured out a way to get both the C630 and the GP20 running. Now I've got two Tyco engines that run pretty well, and I think I'm going to be able to use these for quite a long time. I'm also very curious to see whether or not the screw I used to replace that pivot is going to cause any issues later down the line, whether the gear will strip out, if we'll have any issues, or just any oddities that'll come up. So I'm really curious to see what'll happen, and I'm definitely going to be running this GP20 a lot to see if anything happens.